going to spend our whole lives waiting to participate fully in life, or are we going to find a way to do that like right in the middle of the crises? What if the crises are never going to stop?
Perfectionism's been my probably lifelong companion.
We are back in conversation with Oliver Burkeman.
I really do believe that most people do not connect to perfectionism.
Right.
Just seeing someone who is perfect the whole time, who never messes up, who has no messiness of life.
The truth is that we're not in control in the first place. So this lovely quote from Elizabeth Gilbert: you're afraid to surrender because you don't want to lose control, but you never had control. All you had was anxiety. It's a lot easier to stop trying to control every detail of your life or of your behavior or your thought. You can encourage people to get closer to the point of being in control, but never quite reaching it.
It's all wrapped up into the optimization, longevity, productivity cultures that we all are so eager to get to and find out the right answer to, but we miss that crucial step. Which is us.
Yes. The wanting to be better, that is not antithetical to aliveness. That is the expression of aliveness. What we're talking about is the distinction between living in a planned way and living in a spontaneous way. It's completely insane when you think about it.
It is, but we've both done it.
Yes, right, exactly. This is the time of day, the 90-minute period when I'm going to be completely spontaneous. This is something I find useful, and you may not, but it might just be how my mind works. In a sense,
if you are a regular listener to the show, or Live Well, Be Well, or this is your first episode you're listening to, I really want to ask just a very small, quick favour. If you could please hit the subscribe button or leave a review, this helps the show more than you can imagine. It means the world to help growing this show. And you all know that I have a huge thing to want to hit 100,000 on YouTube this year, and I can't do that without your support. I really aim to bring you the best guests possible out there, and I pride myself in doing that for the show because it's so important. But to keep the guests coming, to get them to be bigger, and to bring more helpful information to your ears and your eyes, I really would love to ask you to subscribe to the show. Thank you. Oliver Burkeman, welcome back.
Thank you very much for inviting me back. It's good to be here.
So I think, when did we speak? A year ago?
Something like that.
Okay, so my first question is then, where are you right now?
I have always experienced this thing, and I think it's probably very common with writing, especially, where you figure something out about life, and in the case of Meditations for Mortals, that was something about how to go from knowing what you want your life to look like to actually bringing that into reality. You figure it out, or you think you figure it out. You then kind of write a book about it, which shows you all the ways you hadn't yet figured it out. And I think the thing that I think the answer to that for me at the moment is this thing that I use the word aliveness to describe. And I don't really know that it's the perfect word, but this idea that what I want to make sure I have a lot of in my life and my family's life and in the world, to whatever extent I can influence it, is something like aliveness, or a certain kind of energy that I think is actually all too easily squeezed out by a lot of kind of productivity stuff and even some wellness stuff, and that also is what's at issue when we're arguing about artificial intelligence, and when people are really kind of terrified by stuff that's happening politically in the world and all the rest of it. So on that level as well, there's this thing that is at stake is something like humanness, something like really fully or more fully showing up for reality. And it really is that vague in my mind at the moment. And that is the thing I'm trying to get a little bit more clarity and rigor around, because that is a very vague set of thoughts.
But prominent, because you also talk about living in the age of bewilderment, like insufficient choices, the productivity. I mean, I also talk a lot about it in the optimization culture of wellness, which I also think has now become entwined in the optimization productivity culture. And then you talk about this term aliveness, where we're more in line, more productive, I think, than ever before. Connecting to the meditation of mere mortals, we're kind of also losing that time because we're becoming hyper productive and just filling it more. But then somehow I do think we're all feeling less alive.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, right, I think this relates to stuff that I know we've both sort of thought and spoken about, which is the more optimized you get, like there's a real loss to that kind of process of becoming more efficient and optimized. And one way of thinking about that is like what you take yourself to be doing when you try to become perfectly productive or perfectly well, I'm sure, right? Is you take yourself to be getting to the point in the future where you're finally going to be able to sort of relax into life and be like, okay, I've got a handle on this now. I know what I'm doing. And it feels like you never get there. And in some ways it feels like it gets further away. And I think the essence of the reason for this, and the language I use to think about this anyway, is that what we're trying to do in that process of optimization is feel more in control of life in many different ways that people pursue that agenda. And actually, it seems to be the case that there's like an antithesis between feeling in control of life and really feeling alive, and that to some extent you have to let go of the control to feel the aliveness. And you know, again, one thing I'm really struck by is how this kind of crops up on every level. So it's there in the wellness space, it's there in productivity, it's there in our debates about AI. Do we really want to be spending all of our time conversing with AI companions, even if the responses they give us are sort of technically brilliant and helpful, because there's kind of nobody there, and that matters in a friendship or a relationship. And even when people look at the world in terms of politics and climate and all these crises, there's a little part of us very often that's thinking like, if we can just get to the point where that's all dealt with, then we can like have the life that we want to live. But what if the crises are never going to stop? Are we going to spend our whole lives waiting to participate fully in life, or are we going to find a way to do that like right in the middle of the crises, whether the crisis is politics or the crisis is your inbox in crisis, you know?
But I really think about this in the terms of like my grandparents' generation. There wasn't the digital sphere that we live in right now. There wasn't the wellness culture. There wasn't the productivity culture. There wasn't as much access to information. And Gretchen Rubin said, technology is a good servant, but a bad master. And I think about that a lot in the terms of where we live right now in this generation. Obviously, my grandparents' generation lived through the war. They had a completely different set of things to think about than we do. But our stress feels more intense than ever before. I try and think about that in the terms of like relationship to the term aliveness that you spoke about. Do we think it's the rise of AI? Because if it's only going to get more prominent in our lives, how do we keep that connection with aliveness that you just spoken about in a world that is just changing more quickly? And as you said, trying to get to an end point.
Yeah.
We don't even know what that's going to look like in 5 to 10 years.
No, totally. And I think the general point, AI is definitely a part of this, but I think the general sort of technological point that also Gretchen is getting at in that quotation is that I'm not saying it's the only thing that's going on here, but one thing that's going on is that the more control we do have over reality through technological reasons, the more we can do things that our grandparents or great-grandparents' generation could never do, or could only do over it would take much more time and effort to do. The more we get close to, it feels like we're getting close to that moment of like, okay, now we're in control. And so it's more frustrating that you can't. And so back in my book 4,000 Weeks, I wrote about how like it's more frustrating to wait 3 minutes for something in the microwave than it is to wait 2 hours for it in the oven. And on some level, that's because 3 minutes is so close to instantaneous that it's kind of an insult to our sense of wanting to be like gods over life. It's kind of an insult that there's still that 3 minutes left. Whereas once you've consigned something for an hour or more to the oven, you're just like, okay, that's going to take the time it takes. And like go back even further than grandparents and great-grandparents. Like go back to the medieval period and just imagine how, I mean, a terrible life in almost every respect, but try and imagine how like everything would have been so uncertain and so unexplained, and nobody would have had any way of knowing when the next famine or war or plague was going to completely kind of absolutely destabilize their lives in every way, or indeed end their lives. Nobody would have fallen into the mistake then of thinking like, we're almost in control of reality, so let's postpone like really living until that. That would just have been so completely off the table that you wouldn't have fallen into that illusion. Whereas I think as contemporary technological people, we're always in this risk of feeling like, well, it seems like I ought to be able to get my life, my health, the world in which I'm living into enough order that I can forget about it and really plunge into life. But I never get there. So I think we have to do something quite challenging, right? Which is we have to understand that that moment is never coming and sort of choose to live now as a result. While addressing all of those things, right? Still answer your emails, still fight to make the crises in the world better than they are, but not postponing engagement until they're all sorted out.
You said something there that was really profound. That's been quite a big part in my life over the last 3 years, but also I've also brought it into the practices with my clients who come and see me in clinic, which is the word let go. There's something quite profound about that word. And a client said to me last week, you said to me about Sarah a year ago just to let go. And there was something so liberating and freeing about that, just that word. And sometimes that's what I say to myself in those moments of like pure chaos or utter perfectionism. And I know we spoke a lot about imperfectionism and the Imperfectionist, which is like your very famous newsletter, that we did a lot on that on the last episode, that I connected to so much because I think perfectionism's been my probably lifelong companion through my years. Yeah. And I've had to learn to love it and accept it. And then once I understand that, I can have that feeling more of letting go. I speak a lot about the information diet, which is kind of feels like it relates a lot to what you're talking about. We're constantly consuming. So we can also have more control because we feel like we have more resources.
Yeah.
But how do we let go in the rise of all of this? Because that to me is one of the most, I think, fundamental words someone can say to themselves, especially if they feel seen by the term perfectionist versus imperfectionist. It's the hardest thing to do.
Totally. It's totally a lifelong struggle. I'm absolutely a work in progress. Nobody should make the mistake of thinking I've got this figured out. I think a couple of things here are really interesting. So firstly, I don't think that when we're talking about the futility of struggling for control and the benefits of letting go, I do not think we're saying you don't have like agency and influence over your life. In fact, I would say that the way to have more agency and influence over your life is to be not seeking that kind of absolute control. So information diet's a great example, right? If you can find in yourself the discipline and the willingness to sort of decide what you consume and what you don't, that's not like antithetical to letting go. That's exercising the agency that you do have in the world. The other point that I've found really helpful when it comes to this idea about letting go is it's easy to think that what we're talking about here is that we're holding on to something and we've got it under control, but actually we need to let it out of our control. The truth is that we're not in control in the first place, right? So this lovely quote from Elizabeth Gilbert who says, like, you're afraid to, I'll get it slightly wrong, but you're afraid to surrender because you don't want to lose control, but you never had control. All you had was anxiety, right? And I think this is a brilliant insight because it's a lot easier to stop trying to control every detail of your life or of your behavior or your thoughts or your, body or anything like that, when you realize that despite this feeling of clenching and trying to stay in control, like it's all an illusion to begin with. It's not giving up control. It's seeing that you already don't have that kind of like totalitarian power over how things go. And this relates to something that I'm sure I talked about last time, but let me say it one more time and you don't need to include it. But it's this line that made a huge difference to me from the Zen master Hoon Jiu Kennet, who said that her way of teaching Zen to her Zen students was not to lighten the burden of the student, but to make it so heavy that he or she would put it down. And what I take this kind of slightly mysterious line to mean is like, you can encourage people in our role, say, or if you're dealing with yourself, you can encourage people to sort of get closer to the point of being in control, but never quite reaching it. Or you can so clearly see that the struggle for control is futile that actually then it's quite easy to put that burden down and be free that way, not by achieving the control, but by really seeing the futility of the struggle. So that's all a bit abstract, but I find that very beneficial. When I get into those grooves where I'm trying to micromanage everything and make sure everybody's happy with what I'm doing, or that I'm not making any wrong decisions, the answer is not to sort of let go in the sense of admitting defeat and saying, well, okay, the answer is to see that I already didn't have that control over what people were thinking, or how the day is going to unfold, or whether something I write is going to be well received or not. I'm not letting go of control. I'm just seeing that I already didn't have it.
I think that's one of the most powerful things that I've learned in my writing of my new book.
I want to know more about this, by the way.
The fundamental of my work, and I talk about it a lot now, and we touched on this before, was self-compassion. And I believe that's one mechanism to allowing yourself to have that ability to let go. Because you write about things because you struggle with them, right? And I've struggled 100%. With self-compassion without knowing that. Because you said something that's really stuck with me, that if something makes you cringe, lean into the cringe. Now it doesn't make me cringe, which is really interesting. When I first started writing about, this, I was thinking, well, how much people are going to connect to this? But I connected to it from when I actually could see that control was such a big part of my life. And I've also seen that through the patients I teach. And I know that, we work in different realms, but ultimately quite similar people, maybe in how we approach projects and how we see ourselves. And you wrote something around productive discomfort tolerance, which I find really interesting, because when I was thinking about people who come to see me and how I approach my work, people always want the after result, but without any setbacks. And that's where I believe self-compassion can become a very big kind of mechanism to actually get you to where you want to go. It has a lot of motivation connected to self-compassion if you actually do it properly. Yeah. And I see that the people that actually transform themselves in clinic are the ones who can relate to those setbacks just completely differently.
Yeah.
And that's a really big thing. And I believe that they develop self-empathy, because we connect a lot to self-empathy. And I was thinking about this product discomfort tolerance that you talk about, sitting in the unpleasantness, allowing ourselves to feel that. Can you talk a little bit more about the context of that and how that's how it showed up in your life?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I just find again and again the thing that messes me up and causes me to sink into procrastination or any number of other sort of negative states is not the fact that there are difficult things involved in life, or that I might have to make some tough choices, or I might have to make decisions without being able to know that it's going to be the right decision. It's none of that difficulty. It's some kind of subtle internal demand that there shouldn't be the difficulty. And to your self-compassion point, that it's kind of a bad judgment on me if I haven't figured out a way at this point in my life. I mean, come on, I'm not young anymore, right? To eliminate that difficulty. So the moment there's actually something very, I think, self-compassionate, or at least, friendly towards yourself about accepting that lots of meaningful things are difficult. There's a separate side to this, which is sometimes we expect them to be harder than they are going to be as well, which we can talk about. But if you live in a world, as an example, right? If you live in a world that is as wired for acceleration as ours, and you sit down to read a novel or give your full focus to a young child or any number of other things, it's not going to feel great in the first 5 minutes. And why should it? And why would it? And if your next response is well, I hate this experience then because it doesn't feel great, then that's a problem. And if your response is, I must be a terrible parent or a terrible focuser because I can't do this thing without pure enjoyment in the first few minutes, then that's just an unnecessary burden to put on yourself, because these difficulties are going to arise. I keep going back to ideas from Zen Buddhism, I know, but this basic idea that again and again, our psychological problems in life are not the things that happen, the problems that we face, but this demand that we ought to have been able to get rid of problems by now, or find a solution to human existence. And it's the feeling that you ought to have been able to do it better by now that is the problem, not the fact that it involves some some difficulty along the way.
As someone who has spent a long time studying the mind-body connection, I am constantly asked, what do I use to track my health? Since April, you've probably seen, if you're watching this show, me wearing a piece of tech on my arm, and that is No Watch, because I genuinely believe it has been one of the most thoughtful and mind-aware pieces of tech that you can wear. Unlike most wearables that focus just on your steps or your sleep, No Watch is a bit different and gives you real-time insights into your nervous system, the invisible engine that calibrates everything from your stress to your sleep to your recovery, your rest, and ultimately your health. With its stress recovery metric, it doesn't just show you how long you were stressed for, but also how long you recovered. It shows you your homeostasis. And that to me is where real health begins. And I think it's all something that we're craving. And most importantly, it does this without dragging you back to your phone, because that motion just depletes you. It delivers meaningful health insights to you only when something genuinely matters, using AI to turn complex signals into clarity that you can understand. And in just 5 days, it calibrates to your body and creates your personalized health fingerprint. You can try it for 30 days completely free. And if you're curious, now's the time, because they're giving you guys 15% off with my code LWBW15 if you head to nowatch.com. And you guys know, as listeners of Live Well Be Well and this whole community, that understanding yourself in the most mindful way is one of the most powerful things that you can do for your health. And this little gadget helps you on your journey. But isn't adversity what builds the resilience? Like, if we don't face these moments of toughness, and if, there's nobody can go and figure something out instantly, right? They're all moments of built resilience through adversity.
I think totally. The interesting thing about that is, and I don't know what you think about like the specific language around resilience, I think it can, especially when it gets turned into things like grit, there's this potential misinterpretation that what we're doing is like learning to tough it out in a particular kind of macho way that might work for some people, but also I don't think works for a lot of people. Another way of thinking about exactly the same pattern, it seems to me, is that like you confront some difficult conversation at work or in a relationship, or a difficult passage of a creative book you might be writing, for example, just to pick an example far too close to home for me. Every time you take yourself through that difficulty, like, you sort of hold your own hand, as it were, and go through it, and don't beat yourself up for experiencing it, but get to the other side. The resilience you build is also like trust in yourself, right? It's like a little bit extra, a little bit more trust that next time you might have the resources, the internal resources to cope with the next thing and the next thing. Because we really do, I think, default to this position of we have to figure everything out now, because we just don't trust future self to be able to handle what comes their way, even though at every point up to now in your life you've managed to handle it, right? Otherwise you wouldn't be here. And I think so. I almost wonder whether the language around resilience needs complementing with this sense of like, it's like extending the circumference of self-trust, because every time you weather a bit of that difficulty, it's like, what more evidence do you need, right, that you can actually handle it?
Well, I had Corey Richards on here, who is a National Geographic photographer, but also he summited Everest twice without oxygen. So he has an amazing sense of resilience. And he defined resilience to me as letting go. The ability to be able to let go, because so much about resilience is like gripping and like holding on and pushing through. But actually, when he reframed it like that to me, I thought, wow, that's true. The beauty of resilience is to let go, which brings me back to the kind of earlier conversation that I had. The times when I think I faced the most adversity in my life is you always try to keep pushing, and then you get to a point where you physically can't push anymore. You hit a wall, and in a way you break, and that breaking is when you have to let go.
Yeah.
And if your body will break if your mind doesn't break, that kind of happens. And then that build up for me is the resilience, the learning, the self-trust, the kind of looking back and going, okay, I should have maybe trusted myself more on that decision, as opposed to having this mind that kept pushing me forward.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I think this is so true. And when I've seen this kind of idea raised before, people increasingly mention that it's a bit of a cliche now in social media spaces, but that style of Japanese ceramics where breaking the bowl and reforming it is what strengthens it and gives it its beauty and survival. It's that idea. It's a cliche for a reason. I think it's again, it's just so striking to me how much of my earlier adulthood I lived with this sense of like, me in the future can't really be trusted, and I probably won't be able to cope with the things that happen. So I've got to take lots and lots of very sort of anxious action now to forestall them. And once you've, I certainly wouldn't be able to climb Everest with or without oxygen. But once you've done something that is at the limits but within your capacities, it's like, a capacity has been strengthened. And I think you get there by letting go. You get there by trusting that the you'll be in the future when the adversity comes has what it takes.
Do you feel that, you've obviously written so many incredible books. I know you're maybe starting to think about another one at the moment. What can you relate any parts of that to your last year on what you've kind of struggled through?
I mean, just looking at the level of work stuff, right? And I'm very happy to talk about other things as well, but it's clear to me in the context of writing and trying to organize my thoughts around another book, I do have to apparently keep relearning this lesson about like resistance and trusting the process. And I hope I relearn it at a deeper level each time. Who knows? Maybe I'm just going around in circles. But you do get, I do get at first back into that mode at the beginning of a project like that, where a big part of me wants to like map it all out, know exactly what's happening, know which weeks I'll have hit which milestones, understand what the whole thing's going to look like in advance. And then all I have to do is implement the strategy. And I do think it's really good to have a plan for things like that. But I always have to relearn that the role of the plan is not to dictate my actions over the next months or years. The role of the plan is like, it's really good for some reason to do the plan, and then to have the plan as some sort of North Star that you're navigating by, and then maybe you change the plan. But what it is not is a kind of, or should not be, is a kind of inner taskmaster telling you what to do each day. Because apart from anything else, I have always found, I don't know if it's true for you, true for other people, but like whenever I get really, really rigid and strict about how I'm going to translate my goals into my daily actions and everything, the aliveness just goes out of them, right? And suddenly I feel like I'm being bullied by like past me to go through all these steps, whether I want to or not. And in writing, the result will be less good writing, right? Because it'll be done in this sort of sense of chore and like, now I've got to handle this. So it might not be a comprehensive philosophy for life to just like do what you feel like doing at any given moment. That might lead to all sorts of pitfalls. But it's really important for me as a writer not to squeeze out the role for like, okay, I'm at my desk. It's 9:00 on a Wednesday morning. Like, what part of this project, what set of ideas do I actually feel like going deeper into? Because why not harness that energy instead of using a goal setting method to squelch it and push it away?
It's hard, isn't it, though? Because every time I open, there's a variety: LinkedIn, Substack, X, Instagram. There's always these productivity goals. And I know that we spoke about that a lot last time, but something that I found really interesting when thinking about today's conversation, and I know that we spoke about the perception of time a lot last time, but I actually experienced this recently, which made me think about today, was that I always think everyone says time flies when you're having fun. It's like a very like generic term, which is really true. But it's actually true that the novelty of having fun makes time feel longer.
Yeah.
And so what you just said then about having these strict goals and having this kind of very specific schedule can take that novelty out, can take those moments of creativity removed.
Yeah, because you just see it stretching out ahead of you for like months. Like, this is what I've got to trudge through. Absolutely predictably. Yeah, no, totally.
And yeah, I wrote down something that you had written. The focus on using time well each day makes you feel like something to survive. When you realize what you were doing, when did you realize you were actually doing this to yourself? So allowing you to use your time well. And I think that I could productively write down my time well. But then that made me think, well, is that the best way to do it? Without having these pockets of inspiration, without having these moments of joy and novelty and these free time in your diary to actually explore that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one useful thing that I find here, maybe what we're talking about is the distinction between like living in a planned way and living in a spontaneous way. And that sense that a lot of us have that neither one is quite enough on its own, because planning squelches the life from things, but pure spontaneity, like you're worried that you might forget all the things that matter. And that's what I thought for a long time. Like, okay, I've got to find time for both of these. And then you start doing weird things like time boxing space for serendipity into your schedule or something, right? It's completely insane when you think about it in detail. But
it is, but we've both done it.
Yes, right, exactly.
I'm laughing because I'm like, we've both been
this
there.
Is the time of day, the 90-minute period when I'm going to be completely spontaneous. Here, this is something I find useful, and you may not, but it might just be how my mind works. In a sense, you're always acting spontaneously, whether you like it or not, right? So even if what you decide to do with a spontaneous moment is implement your very strict time boxing schedule, you are in that very moment making that decision, whether you do it consciously or unconsciously. Unless you're literally like in jail or, you know, someone's physically manhandling you, put that aside. You're always in the moment deciding what to do. It's just that quite often, if you're a certain kind of, you know, anal person, what you're doing is, what you're deciding to do in that moment is carry out your strict plan that you made yesterday. So I found this a very sort of liberating realization. Again, it's one of these things, not where you change how you live, but where you see more clearly how you're already living. I'm always deciding moment to moment what to focus on, where to go, whether to keep a commitment I've made, whether to show up to a podcast recording or just, I don't know, just fail completely to do so, right? It's all technically within my power, and all I need to do is sort of be aware of that and be aware that there are consequences of doing one and not the other, and etc. I think that makes it a lot easier to know when to stick with a plan and when to diverge from a plan. If you see that what you're actually doing is the same thing in every moment, you're choosing how to use that moment. And then I think it's very much easier to sort of say, well, okay, my plan for my day is to put a few hours into this project and try to get to this outcome with it, and then to do that, and then to do that. And then something else arises. And, oh, okay, now I'm just making a decision in this moment about whether that's something to change course for. You see what I'm saying? I don't know if I'm expressing it properly, but like actually every moment is a choice. Even you're not actually governed by the plan you made yesterday. You're choosing to implement the plan you made yesterday. And so the freedom that we fear losing when we stick to strict plans is actually always there. The serendipity and spontaneity that we're a little bit scared of because it feels so out of control is just, in fact, the basic state of our whole lives. So we're already in that kind of scary situation, and all we ever need to do is try to make the wisest decision about what to do in the very next moment. I don't know if you find that convincing or not. You'll have to tell me.
Well, sometimes I feel like I can just go through and add more and more on and be more unconscious. I feel like the busier I get, the more unconscious I am.
Right.
That's the way I feel.
Yeah.
And actually, when I give myself that time, but the pressure to have that time is also quite hard. I mean, for instance, as I'm someone who loves to be busy, so I fill myself with more busyness.
Yeah.
Is that me moving away from feeling? Yes, probably. Is that why I'm connected to self-compassion? Yes, probably.
Yeah.
Because I have to have it as an efficient tool to allow myself to have time off. But it's interesting. You talk about when we free up time in our diary or in our lives, we just fill it with more stuff. And so we live in this weird moment where actually we try. I think about this now with AI. People are implementing more into their daily lives because of AI is allowing them to free themselves up.
Yeah.
They're becoming more efficient. So we're outputting more. I think about this with the show. Started off the show with just me, maybe one other guest 5 years ago. And us just having this conversation back and forth, and every week going, okay, maybe I should record another show. Now we're doing 3 shows a week. We're putting out more content than ever. We've, gone to YouTube. We're making it bigger and better than trying to do more than ever before. But we've also utilized our systems better.
Yeah.
So we've obviously brought in more AI tools, less people, become more efficient, but my time is actually smaller.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the real, I am not here to question your content strategy, right? But what I think is really important to connect to, and I recognize equivalent things from my own different domains and stuff. But I think the important question is always why are you doing it, right? And if tools and technologies, AI or otherwise, enable us to do more of spend more time expressing our passions and enjoyment of the world in action, that's fantastic and really good. If you think, and because you're human on some level you probably do, there's no shame in it at all, that this expansion process is it's a trajectory that would eventually get to a point where you'll be okay, now this is the correct size of things and this is the correct scale and we're on all the platforms that count and now we've arrived, I think that's the bit that one always has to be a little bit skeptical of, just because obviously that is never going to be the case. And feels like every week I encounter news of a social media platform that I literally hadn't heard of its existence. So clearly I cannot be expected to already be all over that with my thoughts and content, So there's a point, again, it's this idea that what you're ultimately, I think what we have to say we're doing when we try to sort of get on top of everything and conquer these mountains of opportunities or of demands, whatever they are in each different person's life, is say you're not going to get your arms around it all. You're going to have to stop at a certain point. You're going to have to let certain people down in some contexts or turn down certain opportunities, not be on certain platforms, right? This is just a given. It's baked into the world. And then it's just a matter of making those decisions as well as you're able. It's the same with writing a book, right? You could do it, you could keep tweaking it for years until it was even better than you could just, that is an absolutely unfinishable project. It's finished when you develop the sort of agency and authority to say, that's where I'm going to stop. And, that's the only thing we can do. I think the problem is, when we're sort of chasing this notion that at some point the world is going to tell us that we've done enough and reached the sort of the correct place to be able to finally relax.
I'm interrupting for one moment to ask one small favor. Please subscribe to the show. This helps it grow more than you know. And I'm so bad at asking this from you. I'm so bad at thinking about this. But my goal is 100,000 to get to on YouTube. And I really want to bring you more content and better guests and bigger episodes. And we can only do that with your help together. So please do hit subscribe. Thank you. Well, I find it interesting because you wrote this book kind of, I don't want to say just before the rise of AI, because I guess it was coming up then, but now it feels even more relatable to try and intersect these ideas to have more agency. And I think, I don't know if you struggle with this, I'm sure you do because you're human. I think everyone struggles with this, which is comparison.
Right. Yeah, no, totally.
It makes me think about the upward social comparison theory, is when you compare your life to others who basically look online to have better, calmer, easier lives than yours. And I think now that's becoming more stringent than ever before because we're just in a constant vortex of comparison. I mean, from the moment that one wakes up to the moment you fall asleep, you always feel that you're behind. And Anne Lambert, I love this quote. I think I might have heard this from you on a podcast, but I love her. Never compare your inside to anyone else's outsides. And, I have had aliveness since you messaged me yesterday in my mind when I was thinking about all of this. That kind of does kill our aliveness.
I think that's true. I think it's really interesting because I sort of half wonder if there's a point at which this process of just constant drowning in opportunities to make negative comparisons between yourself and everybody else, where it kind of loses its force, or maybe becomes a little easier to let go of, right? Because losing hope can be very useful thing sometimes. And actually, in that kind of context, when you really understand that there's always going to be someone who seems to be doing better than you, or making more than you, or looking better than you, or writing better than you, whatever it is, like, and probably lots of people. But when that's sort of borne in on you enough, I wonder whether we're going to get to a place where it stops being so tormenting just through its sheer kind of ubiquity, right?
But it's increasing faster than ever before. That's what I'm finding interesting in this narrative. If you think 10 years ago, comparison was obviously there, but it just wasn't as poignant as it is today. And it's rapid.
Yeah. No, I'm not sure I have a really great, deeply wise thing to say about this, except that, I think the insides and outsides point, that lovely Anne Lamott line that you quoted, is so powerful, because it's really important to see not just that it doesn't matter that you're not at the top of whatever like x-axis or y-axis of greatness you've decided to focus on. Not even just the fact that you select the one that you're doing badly on, right? That's the thing. You always, at the moment you're just at the top of some pyramid, it doesn't matter anymore. You only care about that, people who, like, once you fly everywhere, once you're a billionaire flying everywhere in a private jet, you compare your private jet to everyone else's private jets and think your private jet sucks, right? It goes on and on and on. But also, it's just not you're not comparing apples with apples. How someone presents themselves has got essentially nothing to do with what's going on the inside. There was a lovely line I came across the other day from the New Yorker writer Gia Tolentino, who's got, I'll get it wrong, but she says something along the lines of, like, some of the most dysfunctional and out of control people you could ever imagine are, like, right now all over social media presenting their lives as completely calm and serene and sorted, right? I think we're beginning to learn from certain kinds of social media meltdowns that it's not just that you might be as happy and have it all together as somebody who you see on social media, but, like, some of those people might actually be quite chaotic, having quite chaotic and disastrous lives, and you might be very happy, in fact, at the level of calm and serenity and achievement and self-compassion that you have in your own.
Yeah. Well, I know that when we first spoke, you weren't on social media, and now you've gone on to social media.
Yeah, I mean, I was on Twitter for a long time, and now Twitter's unusable. I'm in constant struggle with how much I ought to be on any of these things. I'm never feeling fully resolved about it. But yes, with some excellent assistance, I am now doing some more on platforms that I'd previously just been completely baffled by and unfamiliar with. Yeah.
Well, I think with all of these models that show the good life, do you think that's now distracting us from it feels almost impossible to live a good one because we're having these constant streams?
This is just sort of sensing the zeitgeist. It's not science on any level, but I feel that there is a real movement away from some of that. There is a real sense, both in the terms of the worst excesses of social media are sort of stepping away from them, a real understanding that a lot of the corporations behind those platforms do not have your best interests at heart on any level. They have maximizing your time on site as the only goal. And then also in the context of AI, which is, I found really interesting to witness, a real sort of revaluing of the human, right? And a sense that, like, I'm fine if the podcasts I'm listening to or the YouTube videos I'm watching have had AI used in assistant as a tool in some part of the production cycle, but, like, it's now very clear to me that what I want in a podcast is 1, 2, 3 human beings telling me what it's like to be them in one way or another, right? And I read some news story just in the last few days about plans to sort of flood the zone of audio podcasting in the States with, like, limitless numbers of completely artificially generated conversation. And I don't know if what's going to happen or if this is going to be terrible for humans making podcasts and other content, but I know what I I know it makes it much clearer to me that exactly what I want as a consumer of those things. And I've got to believe that there are enough people in that boat that actually you get back towards this kind of thing where what counts is the human. And I don't think this is just a sort of conversation about books and content creation, right? I think this goes far beyond that. It's not that there are necessarily specific skills that an AI will never be able to do. I think that sort of argument is a hostage to fortune, because then, there's a new news story the following week and it turns out an LLM can do that thing. But that there is something deep in all of us that wants certain things that we do to be done with other thinking, feeling, sentient, conscious, emoting psyches. And it's not good enough for there to be all the output of that, but there to be no person inside, which brings us back to the aliveness point. I don't know if you have strong feelings one way or the other about AI therapy, for example.
Yeah,
I think to me, I want to hear yours, but to me it seems obvious, like absolutely an LLM could be a source of interesting journal prompts or questions for self-reflection, or could tell you about breathing techniques and all those kind of conveying of information. Fine. But if you think that the ultimate benefit of a therapeutic relationship is precisely that there's somebody else like holding you in their mind, then it's obviously it's just not therapy. It's like it might be a useful adjunct, but and goodness knows we live in a world where really high quality therapy is out of reach for vast majority of people, I think.
Yeah.
But like if it's a relationship that is having the positive effect, I don't see how there can be a relationship, unless I suppose you go really science fiction and say that the LLMs are indeed conscious and thinking. But
I don't think any of us would agree that they're conscious.
That's a whole separate line of argument that we should not get into here. Yeah.
No, I think the AI therapy is a really interesting I've been having that a lot right now. I actually had that at dinner last night when we were talking exactly that. I think the problem that I think you said one really good point, that therapy feels so out of reach for so many people. One, because it's very confronting to speak to somebody else that you don't know about your deepest, darkest problems. And a lot of the time people might lie in therapy because they also feel judged. With an AI, you're less likely probably to lie because you know that there's going to be a reduced judgment. And you also know that they're potentially going to agree with you, the AI, and make you feel seen. And there's going to be less of that friction. Whereas a person staring you back, sat opposite you in person or even on Zoom, it's more confronting to say something that you maybe don't want to hear. With AI, I think the problem that we're seeing in society right now, and this is just my theory and this is just my opinion, is that people feel less connected than ever before, which we know, and mental health is rising more worse than it ever has.
Yeah.
People don't feel seen. And I think that's one of the biggest things. When we lose connection and we lose the vulnerability that we have with proper human connection, we don't feel seen and we don't feel understood. In comes this amazing tool.
Yeah.
And it allows you to feel quite seen. It agrees with you. It's very agreeable. And now there's this conversation that can be quite manipulative, because whatever you say, it's going to say, I totally agree with you, Oliver. That makes complete sense.
Right. And in some cases, it tells people that they're like gods who've discovered some amazing new discovery about the nature of humanity, right? And then they go completely, sorry.
It's true. And so that agreeability, but also that person feeling seen, which I think is a really, really important part of being human. Because if you don't feel seen, you feel very lonely. And that's where the concept of loneliness comes in. You can be in a room full of people,
but if you're not seen,
but you can feel completely alone.
Right.
And that's not having that conversation of feeling seen.
Right. And yes, and I sort of have felt in certain contexts like I'm being a party pooper, but like if you feel seen by an AI, you are fooling yourself, right? Because there's no seer.
Exactly.
And the question of whether that's better than nothing, given given how out of reach so much therapy is, or whether it's actually worse than nothing, seems to me to be like part of where this conversation is at, right? I mean, maybe with enough controls and enough self-awareness on the part of the user and enough, health warnings, the fact that that's kind of not real is not a problem, right? So a parallel that somebody brought up the other day, which I thought was very interesting, is like, I know people do have absolutely real relationships with their dogs, for example, but they probably put a large amount of fantasy on top of, in terms of like how much a dog can really sort of understand and connect, right? I'm not disputing that that's a real relationship and that dogs feel and think, but I think that it's probably a relationship that humans put quite a lot of like stuff into that is not technically true about what's going on in a canine mind. So maybe that's okay too if it's a simulated mind on a computer. But I guess I don't think so. Like I think there's got to be something there, and there is something there in sort of most animals as far as we understand.
But also you can touch them.
Right.
You
right.
have a physical connection to them.
Yeah.
And they, dogs can sense feelings.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they're not going to give you direct advice, but
Right.
they'll comfort you in a certain time. They'll help release the oxytocin.
Absolutely.
That's all really important. But an AI is just telling you what you want to hear.
Right. Yes. And so maybe it's almost opposite to what I said, right? It's like people treat the AI as if they're like the wisest person they ever met, and they understand that, their dog is not going to be able to give them life advice, but can do something that's really important in life that actually some other animals can be a part of. Yeah, I think it's such a kind of fascinating and interesting development. I keep seeing that it's like the number one use case of LLMs now is this sort of therapeutic conversation. Somebody, I wish I remember who it was, but I was having a conversation online with somebody who made this really good point that when you talked about it being less confronting to talk to an LLM, when you tell your deepest, darkest secrets to a therapist, obviously a good therapist will create a very trusting, secure environment where you can really trust that they're not going to go and post about it immediately afterwards. But you can't totally know, right? So there's something very important about trust, is that it shouldn't be 100% certain, right? If you're my therapist and I tell you a deep, dark secret, I want to basically be sure that you're going to keep my confidences, but I could never know. And that's actually a very powerful and important moment, I think, for someone in any relationship, therapy or otherwise, to be able to risk that thing. And as you say, assuming the sort of basic data security and privacy of the LLMs, there's no risk at all. You could tell them the most utterly monstrous, shocking things in the world, and they'll just affirm if you prompt them to affirm your views on the matter, they will. So I think that's really important, that the fact that real relationship has that little element of genuine risk in it. Like, you might be shamed, you might be rejected, you might be laughed at for the thing you said. And then that makes it really valuable when a good therapist doesn't do those things, right? Because they could.
Oh, 100%. But they're also a good therapist will challenge you.
Right. That too. Right. Challenge in a friendly and on your side way, but like tough love when required. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's the problem with AI.
Yeah.
Which it is interesting how it connects to aliveness, because you'll feel great about yourself after you speak to an AI, that's for sure. But is it useful? Is it useful in human context? Probably not. No, because you're going to go around with a disbelief of maybe what is true.
Yeah, and you see all these stories now being widely reported of like really serious delusions and people spiraling into terrible places by what they're told and what they come to believe. And I guess I believe that we're all a little bit prone to that, and that these are just the most lurid examples of something that we all need to be aware of. Some other people seem to argue that this is something that's a specific risk for people who have only a particular kind of psychosis or particular proneness to mental insecurity. And obviously it's worse for some people than others, but like I don't think I'm so special that if I spent like several hours a day in a room conversing with a LLM that was sort of designed basically to convince me that it was a human, that I would have the great mental resilience to resist falling into that vortex.
No.
Not at all. No,
but they're very convincing. That's the thing that we are not aware of, because empathy is such an important value, but how empathetic we are all the time to people is also a really interesting subject. I find very interesting. And so an AI will give you the fake empathy.
And meanwhile, I mean, we don't need to talk about this forever. I find it so interesting. But like, meanwhile, you are relating to a box on your computer screen partly as if it were a real human, but also as if it's there just to do your every bidding, right? I mean, this is how much of a Luddite I am. I've sort of had this problem with Siri and Alexa as well, right? I think if there is a technology that you're encouraged to think of as a human in some way, but you're also encouraged to think of as only being there to do your every bidding and to be at your beck and call, that's kind of icky. There's something corrupting about that. Like it's not good to, because and you know, it seems to be quite a risk that you're then going to treat. It's going to make it more likely that you treat other real humans in your life like nothing but
Disposable
instruments for your goals, right? And not as whole, real, full people.
No, it's true. It's true. I think it's something that we always have to be very aware of. I mean, sometimes I do shout at Alexa and somebody just say to me the other day, you've got to be really careful of how you speak to Alexa. And
There was a whole thing early in the days of Alexa. It was well noticed that it was like turning young kids into like jerks, right?
Yeah.
Because they would not be told off for barking commands at Alexa, and then they would just turn and bark commands at mum or dad and genuinely not understand why one was okay and one was wrong. Yeah. I've got enough work trying to gently explain to my son that he shouldn't just order his parents around without like also having a technology in the corner that he is supposed to order around, you know.
So moving on from AI, because this is also something that maybe is to bring in the self-compassion with our relationship with AI. I know we've touched on this like briefly throughout the show, but how has your relationship with self-compassion changed from the last time I spoke to you till now? Because it's something that you fundamentally know that I'm very interested in. But you also said to me really interestingly, after we came off that original talk that we had, which I didn't think was going to go into self-compassion. Like it was about productivity. It was about time management. It was about looking at perfectionism and being an imperfectionist and being okay with that. But it was really interesting. And when we left, you said to me, I'm really trying to like understand this a lot more. It's really piquing my interest, which is really interesting to me because I just didn't think it was going to come up.
Right.
And I thought, if only I knew that, I would have had the whole conversation. So I couldn't not bring it up today because, I mean, it's kind of instrumental now to all the work that I do. And obviously I said to you earlier, the cringe part was really interesting to me when you said that. How cringe-averse is it to you now? Like when you think about the term self-compassion or the things that you do in your life, like what's your journey been with it in the last year?
Well, I might end up recapping a bit from the last conversation because I think it is a deepening of that same idea. But the cringe originally was this notion that like there's something sort of self-indulgent or self-absorbed about like, or that you're a sort of as if the invitation in the idea of self-compassion is to think of myself as like very specially in need of like being treated well, which just goes against like everything that I've sort of been raised to think and to feel. And a big breakthrough, and this is a recap from last time, but a big breakthrough for me was encountering ways of expressing this idea that made it out as being that all I was being asked to do was not be more unkind to myself than I would ever dream of being to like a friend, right? So I think that realization of how easy it is to sort of go through the day shouting at yourself, not just in ways that are mean, but in ways that like you yourself would never do to the people you live and work with, because like, of course you wouldn't, right? That was a useful moment.
But do you remember when that moment happened? Because I remember when that moment happened.
Right.
And there was a moment when something just flipped. All of a sudden I was like, wow, that is what I've been doing. But I think I had to be in the right moment of my life to see it.
Yeah.
Because I think if someone would have said that 10 years ago, I'd been, that's really nice. Totally unrelatable.
Right. Yeah, I don't remember the specific moment. I think that I very often don't remember moments. It's like I look back and it turns out that I'm in a different place than I was a few weeks ago. And writing morning pages is a crucial part of this for me. So that's my one sort of
That's just anything that comes to your mind.
3 sides of an A6 narrow ruled notebook. That's not part of the rules, by the way. That's just what I do, right? Yeah, just wherever my head is at almost every morning really helps these sort of ideas and feelings take shape. I guess where I'm at with it now, and it's interesting because I feel like, what's interesting to me, I feel like I'm quite a psychological journey, but have maybe not recently been thinking of it in terms of self-compassion. But it is about self-compassion because it is understanding, and I think we all go through this, right? That in one way or another, coming to understand the ways in which the difficulties that you encounter in life, or the difficulties you seem to cause yourself in life, sort of are because of ways of being that made sense, right? That were reasonable ways of dealing with aspects of your childhood situation or experiences that you had. And again, not only in the context of people who experience like sort of severe trauma or neglect, which I certainly did not, but that, like, you know, there's some aspect of however all of us are raised that's going to give us certain kind of schemas, you know, certain kinds of rules of thumb that we follow. And I think one of the ones that I developed for sure was this sense that, like, I had to sort of hold the rest of the world at bay, often by doing all my work and being really productive and staying on top of everything, so that I could sort of get breathing space to be myself, right? So there was a sort of a zero-sum arrangement between all the stuff I had to do and like actually living. And so I was constantly like, can I just deal with it all so that I can finally, as opposed to somebody like more psychologically integrated who might say, no, I can be myself through the things that I do and choose to do. And so that's just one pattern. And people have a million different patterns and a million different random screw ups and neuroses, right? But the self-compassion part, I think for me anyway, was seeing like, oh yeah, you don't just do this because you're an idiot or because you haven't figured out the truth or because you haven't come across the right therapy modality or productivity technique. You do it because you can see the ways that it made sense as a way of like managing anxiety and living in the specific context that you're living. And that's really powerful because then it's like, okay, it's not a mystery, but somehow it also then gives me the agency to be like, maybe don't have to do that all the time for the rest of my life. Yeah. And it enables you to be more compassionate to the equivalent patterns in others, the people you live with or work with or are the parent of even, you know. I mean, our son is still young enough that I can hold on to the hope that we're somehow not going to completely screw him up. And I'm sure, you know, all parents do on some level, but just a general empathy for the idea that the way people do things for emotional logics. And if you really want to push that point, like people who I think of as causing all the problems in the world today are also doing for following emotional logics, which doesn't make their actions acceptable or moral, but it's really helpful in kind of understanding what the hell's going on and not just being, shriveled up in hate against the situation.
Yeah, well, I guess the embodiment of self-compassion is love and acceptance. And I think the thing that I figured out, for me, it feels like the antidote to stress. Of when you feel overwhelmed or when you feel, as you said, that like push and pull, which I think we all feel in today's demanding world, that push and pull, that self-compassion allows you just to have a bit of a breather.
Yeah.
And for me, it's propelled the word let go. That's what self-compassion allows me to do. It is that propeller to say, actually, I can let go. Like I am allowed to give myself this in the moment because I find that I seem to be the friend in the friendship group that everyone comes to for advice and sits there. But at points in my life, my friends have gone, why can't you ever take your own?
Right.
You're so great at like being the person we come to, but you seem to struggle with implementing it on yourself. And it's interesting because I think we all have this innate wisdom in us. We all have it, but we have like intellectualized ourselves so much that we push it away.
Yeah.
And I think we live in our minds. And so that self-compassion is bringing in that ancient wisdom that we actually know because we offer it to everyone else. We can very clearly see what we should really do. But when it comes to ourselves, we can't inflict it to ourselves, but we can find it so much easier to give it to someone else.
Yeah, right. No, I think this is a common pattern.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I have a good dose of it as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it is all wrapped up into the optimization, longevity, productivity cultures that we all are so eager to get to and find out the right answer to. But we miss that crucial step, which is us.
Yes, no, exactly.
On this journey.
Yeah.
And I think that's the irony of the whole situation, which I think it's amazing that we all want to be better. I think that's an amazing thing. And that's fundamentally the essence of the quality. I think the essence of all the work that you write about is that ultimately we want to be better. We want to be better with our time. We want to be better friends. We want to be better parents. We want to be better at our work. So we want to be healthier. Like we want all of these things, but we kind of lose ourselves in that.
Yeah, and it's so interesting I haven't really thought about it in those terms, but like the wanting to be better, that is not antithetical to aliveness. That is the expression of aliveness.
Exactly.
But wanting to be better in order to get to a standard where you can then finally relax, that's the thing or where you can finally not have to feel bad about yourself and like you're a huge loser. That is antithetical to aliveness. So it's really interesting, the distinction there. Because I totally agree. That urge to grow is life. Then that's not to be let go of.
Well, I think it feels very right now to read this quote, which I think is kind of connected to people always want to think about the future and how we can implement these things. But you wrote, you can't, and I know this because I got from your favorite quotes that you pulled out that Alice sent me from your book.
Brilliant.
You can't know that things will turn out all right. The struggle for certainty is intrinsically hopeless. So you have the permission to stop. Something about saying that to yourself. And I call them permission slips. I have them for myself, where it's like writing a little permission slip to myself as you would at school.
Yeah.
To say, Sarah's excused from this class.
Yeah.
She's allowed. There's something about didn't want to break rules when I was a kid, but if I was given a permission slip, I was like, okay, I'm allowed to.
Yeah.
I'm allowed to step outside the classroom. I'm allowed to do this. I think about that in my own life. Do you have any ways that people can lessen their grip, loosen their grip, allow themselves permission to stop? Like, how are you doing that actively now? Thinking about terms of living more alive and being more alive in the future and now, I guess.
I mean, for me, and I am a certain kind of like left brainy, intellectual first kind of person, there's a lot of power in understanding the futility of a quest that I'm beating myself up for not having completed, right? So getting everything done, it's very helpful to understand that the supplies are infinite and that they will never be done. Feeling certain about the future, as in that quote, it's very helpful for me to see that it's just not it's not in the gift of humans to be able to feel authentically certain about the future. So for me, that kind of perspective shift is important, and not to do a sales pitch, but that is what I was trying to do in the structure of Meditations for Mortals, right? To try to sort of have the book not just be some information about some things that you might think about differently, but for it to be like an active ingredient that in reading it, you might, a short chapter every day for a month, as I suggest, you might actually sort of go through some of that process of unclenching, of letting go. And then I think really it's just anything in the course of the day that enables you to get a little bit of distance of sort of perspective on the situation. So it's almost like, it's just like deliberately stopping. If you want to remember one thing to do, it is to like take breaks and get up from the desk and stare out of the window. And if you remember that one thing, I think it's actually surprisingly easy then to sort of get back into to become conscious again of like what you're doing and the choices that you're making. There's a Dutch Zen monk I quote quite a lot in this book, who wrote his own book, Time Surfing, which is very highly recommended by me. He's called Paul Lumens, and he really goes in deep on like the weird importance of what he calls, or his English translator calls, taking breathers through the day, right? It seems like some little extra luxury and the first thing that's going to go when you've got a busy day. But in fact, in those moments of stepping away, maybe doing something physical instead of mental, it does not count to stop working on a piece of writing and then just surf the web or social media, right? You've got to physically move your context. But it's much more than a little luxury. It's actually the moment in which you're sort of called back to yourself and you sort of can see that you were maybe starting to scuttle off down one of those avenues of like desperate for control and beating yourself up, and you can sort of like return again and then ask the only question you ever need to ask, as Carl Jung says, which is like, what is the next most necessary thing? What's the thing I'm going to do with the next moment? Which might well be going back to the task you were on, fine. But it's that sort of presence of mind coming back and back, which is actually one of the original meanings of the word that gets translated as mindfulness in the meditation literature, right? We think of mindfulness as sitting down and closing your eyes, following your breath. But actually that sort of ability to have the presence of mind. And I can't really give you, and no one can, like a sort of scheme or technique or app or something to always have that presence of mind so that you can forget about it. Because like you can't forget about, right? It is just literally that job of calling yourself to mind, calling things to mind again throughout the day, falling off the wagon, getting distracted, coming back, and not expecting it to be anything else. Yeah, I think it's really, it was a big deal for me when I realized it was okay for that to just be an ongoing, ever unfolding thing of seeking to become and to stay more and more conscious, rather than beating myself up for not having become perfectly conscious yet.
Yeah.
But now I never expect to do so.
You've given yourself agency, which is
Right.
the best thing ever.
Permission slip to continue being on some level unconscious and compulsive and messed up for the rest of my life. Yeah.
Well, the messiness is what makes us human. I think that's the beauty. No one, and I believe, maybe I shouldn't say no one because somebody might connect to this, but I really do believe that most people do not connect to perfectionism. To seeing someone who is perfect the whole time, who never messes up, who has no messiness of life. I know that when I relate to people, it's because I've seen the struggle. I'm like, wow, they're not this perfect human being, that they have everything together. And I think that's the interestingness with the digital world of today. Like, actually, this is what I love about these conversations, that when people walk through the door, they tell me the messiness of their lives before they come onto the mic. I see the messiness of their lives afterwards. I live in a messiness of chaos that somehow looks fine-tuned when I can sit down.
Yeah.
But I'm not like that way at all.
Yeah.
And it's the acceptance of that. And I actually think that's what brings the beauty to so much of work, is that chaos.
Yeah.
And allowing yourself to accept it and live in it. And, you know, we did I would really, really, really recommend our listeners and watchers on YouTube to go and watch our first episode that we did together, because we really spoke about all these different tools as well and it isn't the optimization of time management, but it's the things that you can do to connect to all of these theories that we spoke a little bit more about in the kind of philosophical side today than we did more in the practical side last time. That we really got into the practicality of it. But the one thing that really stayed with me, which was amazing, because I was literally about to write my book, was that you said work in 90-minute time blocks.
Yes.
And I would always have this thing in my mind where it would be you coming into my brain and being like, nothing's more productive now, you need to stop.
Right.
And I would find it hard. And I would find that if I finished mid-sentence or I do a task and I finish kind of 2/3 in and I leave, I can easily come back to it because I've already got a structure. It's when you sit down and you have nothing that your mind is easily wandering.
Yeah.
But working in those 90-minute time blocks and then like physically removing myself was a massive godsend, because it's interesting. You think that you have to work continuously and the whole time, and having that isn't hard. It's hard to have self-agency in that moment.
No, totally.
But having that changed me.
Oh, I'm really glad to hear it. And by the way, I don't want to undermine this brilliant advice that you're finding so useful, but like, it's not even that there's something deeply magic about 90 minutes. There is research to suggest that there's something quite common about that length of sort of the time you've got the stamina for sort of focused work. And I also have written about how like a total of about 4 hours a day spent on that kind of real deep thought is most people's limit as well. But it's really just having any kind of limit, right? That enables you to say, that's okay. I'm not going to keep going on and on and on and on, which is always implicitly like until I've finished it and can finally feel good about myself. It's like, no, I'm going to do this and then stop. And I have to discover this again and again in my own book writing. Like, if I can actually get into the place where I can happily and not anxiously spend, 2 or 3 hours most days moving a book project forward, the progress you make is like weird. Like, it's amazing how much accumulates after a week or 2 or 3. And it's so much more effective than like deciding to do 10 hours one day and then basically spending the next 3 days, like, first of all, feeling like, oh, I don't need to do anything because I just did 10 hours. And then the other 2 days, realizing how exhausted you are from doing the 10. And eventually it's like, it's worse than the alternative. So, yeah, if you can bring yourself to do just that modest bit, but keep it going most days, you will amaze yourself.
Well, it's like small layered blocks of consistency. I think that's what it is. I'd rather somebody do 10 to 15 minutes of movement a day or add one new food to their trolley every week, because over time, as they add that new food and that new product into their trolley, they're naturally reducing the bad ones and having more diversity, rather than going out and trying to eat 10 vegetables in one day and thinking, well, I've done it now for my week.
Right.
Adding that in like consistently over time actually has a much better outcome.
Yeah, and then absolutely. And then also the other risk to just be aware of there is not rigid consistency, right? It's like most days, it's most times you go shopping, and that's important. It's not just do whatever the hell you feel like, but it also isn't that if you miss a day or mess up once, like it's all over, because that is a very self-defeating way to think as well.
Self-compassion comes in at that moment.
Absolutely.
That's where it's really strong. It's the hardest times to do it, but that's when it's the most effective. Yeah. And that's when you know that you have that thought process more, that you know that you're connecting more to it, because at the beginning it will feel very hard to do it. So we started with what's changed. I want to end with, what do you want to write about next?
I mean, I am obviously like chasing these ideas of aliveness and humanness and like being in reality versus being kind of one removed from reality, which has a lot to do with being online and being in the world offline, but it's not quite the same thing. And I'm trying to sort of shape all this at the moment into something, I guess that just sort of answers the questions I feel I need answering now, which are not quite so much about dealing with overwhelm and the finitude of time, which was my focus before. I'm really glad I figured some of those things out, but more about kind of how do you show up for life and live sanely and hopefully happily in a world that feels so completely volatile and inexplicable and, yes, overwhelming, but overwhelming in kind of new ways, over and above long to-do lists. And that, yes, that lots of what we do to try to handle this seems to end us and leave us feeling less alive, even when it's effective. So, all I want to write is a manual for surviving and thriving in the future forever that's absolutely brilliant and read by everybody. Yes, those are my modest ambitions.
Well, the word that came out to me there was depletion. I feel quite depleted.
Right.
That's probably a word that resonates a lot with me, although I feel very intellectually stimulated, and I feel excited, and I feel like because I'm a curious person, I'm always, there's so many things that now I can access. But weirdly, the curiosity, it can lead to depletion because there's so much. And so that sense of aliveness, I think people will really connect with, or I will anyway.
I'm really glad to hear it.
Like I connect to imperfectionists. I felt so seen.
It's something to do with, it's something to do with like allowing life to nourish you, as well as just trying to get as much as you can out of life. I think that depletion idea is really interesting. Yeah, I'm going to think about that.
How to not feel depleted in the new modern world.
Brilliant. There you go. Thank you.
Just a bit of a brainstorm to end the session on your book. Why not?
Thank you.
So I can't remember, and I should have looked at this, but obviously my last question you answered, which I leave the show, I can't remember what you answered. I will go back and I will have a look. I think it was something to do with self-compassion. But now I would like to know, what does live well, be well mean to you, Oliver? It
means like really fully being here. It means showing up. It means feeling things more and sort of, it's the rain on your skin or whatever, right? It's the real sense of kind of being there for what is happening, being there for other people, not necessarily having fun all the time, but no longer kind of holding the world at one remove in order to sort of stay calm, right? But actually finding the ways to be calm fully in the world. Incredibly vague recipe for for a life of living well and being well. But that's what comes to my mind right now.
Well, no, I love that, because I just thought about the emergence of these two worlds, which is actually showing the real you and the value that you bring every day. So showing the messiness integrated with the external that you bring, because I think that's maybe where, this is me speaking from myself, where that restriction comes in, whereas if I show my best self on all of these case scenarios, then I can kind of collapse into a bit of a mess when I get home. And it's kind of letting that infiltrate into the messiness of like what you do every day. So there isn't perfection there.
Yeah.
And that can feel less exhausting.
Yes, absolutely. And like the world maybe doesn't need to be held at bay in the way that we assume that it does. And people don't get a nice feeling from it when they sense that you're dealing with them just so that they'll go away and leave you in peace, and all the rest of it. So I think it's a win-win situation.
Yeah, we always want the win-win-win situation in every scenario. Oliver, thank you for coming on. I'm very excited to see this depletion of the modern world in maybe 2026, 2027. Thanks for coming on. Everyone who's listening, please go and check our first episode as well. We will link it in the show notes. We will also link your recent book again, Meditation for Mere Mortals, and 4,000 Weeks into the show notes. But thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for asking me back. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.